Hello, and welcome to the Student Ministry Conversations podcast with your hosts, Brent Aiken, David Pruitt, and Russell Martin. This podcast is all about equipping, encouraging, and inspiring youth pastors weekly with topics that are brought to the table by youth pastors from all over the world. And now, here's your host for this week, Russell Martin.
Hey everybody, welcome back to the Student Ministry Conversations podcast. My name is Russell Martin. I am your host this week, and we have today with us Elles Maddry, and we're going to talk about excellence in youth ministry. But before we get to that conversation, just a reminder, all the things that I'm supposed to tell you, make sure and go subscribe to the podcast, either watching it on YouTube, Instagram, or on our normal podcast, wherever you listen to those. Also, our website, studentministryconversations.org, has all of our conversations, almost 100 of them now that are on there, as well as other articles and some free giveaways for you. And then finally, at Talk Student Men on your social medias, you can connect with us, give us information, give us feedback, and maybe requests to be on this podcast as well. So we would love to connect with you. So, Elles, welcome to the Student Ministry Conversation podcast. And could you start off just by telling us a little bit about you, as much or as little, as far back as you want to go, whatever that is. How did you start and how did you get to where you are now?
Yeah, totally. Well, first of all, thank you so much for having me. It's such an honor to be on with you guys. I hear it's your 98th episode, so nearing that 100 mark, that's really exciting. My name is Elles Maddry. I went into full-time ministry when I was 19 years old. My pastor had hired me to be the youth director at the time, which I don't know what he was thinking, but it was a lot of fun. And then after a few years in youth ministry, I transitioned onto the team of a ministry in Colorado Springs called Messenger International, which was founded by a couple who named John and Lisa Bevere, who are authors and itinerant ministers. And they hired me at 22 years old to run their social media department. And all I had under my belt was a few years in youth ministry and a journalism degree. So again, I don't know what they were thinking, but God opened the door and I moved out to Colorado with them. And the pandemic happened in 2020. Well, 2020 comes 1 week before the pandemic shuts everything down. They asked me to take over their podcast network. And then the pandemic happens, and all of a sudden, the only way they can communicate with the world is through social media and podcast, which are my two jobs. And so while things may have gotten a little slower for everyone else, my job and my life got really, really busy during the pandemic, as a lot of church people can attest, are scrambling to go, how do we communicate with our people? How do we communicate with the outside world? And so I spent about 3.5 years on their staff. By the time I left, I was heading up a few of their marketing initiatives, still in their social media, running their podcast department, and traveling with Lisa as she needed, some help on the road whenever she needed. And then a little over a year ago, I transitioned. I got married, and my husband had started a couple companies at that point. And so when we got married, I transitioned off of the Messenger team, and now I work with him. And we have a couple companies. One is it's called Youth Pastor Co. And so we resource youth pastors on that side of what we do. And then the other side of what we do is called Cards Christians Like. It's a card game idea that my husband had a few years ago. And so we have kind of stumbled into the party game side of things, but we're having a lot of fun.
Awesome. And you've graciously agreed to send us a copy of the Cards Christians Like. When we do our 100th episode, around there, some social media things and some other things, we'll have some of those giveaways and a bunch of other ones as well. So you said one of the things you're involved with now is the youthpastor.co. So what is youthpastor.co? What do you do with that? Some basic information for everybody.
Yeah, totally. So Youth Pastor Co. is basically a website. Think of it like the Netflix of sermon series. So it's where a youth pastor can go, they can subscribe, and we have over 100 sermon series on there with sermon series packages that include sermon graphics, sermon curriculum, sermon bumper videos, social media assets, everything that a youth pastor would need to take a 3, 4, 5 week series and preach it to their youth group, and all of the accompanying media assets steps that go along with that. So we have about 100, a little over 100 series on our site right now. We release 2 new series every single month. And so, yeah, that's kind of what we do at Youth Pastor Co. Our number one goal is to resource youth pastors to reach more students.
So is that, I mean, I'm not thinking that's all you do, that's a bunch, but basically focusing on those messages and the stuff like that.
Totally. Yeah. So that's kind of what we do on the Youth Pastor Co. side of the house. We have a couple auxiliary sites as well, where we still very like curriculum based. Our goal was to create the resource that we wish we had had when we were running, our youth ministries week in and week out. My husband kind of says it like this. He had spent a year overseas. He had done youth and young adults ministry for about 10 years. And then he took, a break and went overseas for a mission school for a year. And he came back and he was just, he was praying and he said, God, I feel like I don't know what I'm supposed to do. But I feel like the only thing I was ever good at was being a youth pastor. And so, how can I take, what I did in youth ministry and help other youth pastors who are out there. So that is really the entire goal of what we do. It comes out in multiple expressions. Like I said, we have Youth Pastor Co. We have an annual, strategy with curriculum called Multiply Curriculum. We have a site called youthmen.org. Last week we had a big conference that we do every year just called Youth Pastor Conference, where we put on a free online conference for youth pastors who can tune in from anywhere and just tune in and get equipped and have some of the foremost leaders and influencers in ministry speak directly into youth pastors to equip them. And so, yeah, pretty much everything we do is geared toward resourcing youth pastors.
Yeah. And that's kind of the goal that we set with this. Similar story, doing youth ministry in the trenches for so many years. And then I started looking, you have that point in your life where you start thinking, okay, I'm not going to be able to do the lock-ins every weekend or the game, I can't, a pastor friend of mine said, he said, I'm at the perfect age because I'm old enough. I'm young enough. I can do everything. I'm old enough. I don't have to. And so there is, some of that. So I was looking at the same way, like, how do we, equip student ministers? And one of the things that I run into is, and we're just going to talk because I have questions, we're going to get to those, but now you brought up some things is, as I'm looking at being not in charge, but being helping with other churches in our conference, in our denomination, is, we have a lot of youth pastors who become lead pastors, and there seems to be a gap right now, youth ministry wise. There's, I don't know if it's pandemic, I don't know if it's jobs or anything like that, but we've just seen, so we have a lot of volunteers who are stepping into roles, or people who don't have a vast amount of experience. And so what y'all do here is a great way to help equip. Like, our youth director here does not have years of experience. He's like, hey, I'll do it, but you're gonna have to help me through it.
Totally.
And so that's one of the things that y'all can do with that. Have you seen any kind of trends in youth ministry as far as either youth leaders or more or less, or what are some of the challenges churches are facing right now?
Yeah, totally. Well, I think there's this mindset that social media and all of these other platforms that can be great, but have created and has made, the stage the prize rather than being faithful the prize. And so, it's so easy to get caught up in comparison and say, oh, how can I do that? How can I lead a bigger ministry? How can I do this? When what we found is our mission is to equip youth pastors to be faithful where they are. And I think at the end of the day, when we all stand in front of Jesus, we want to be able to say, God, I did the absolute best I can with the students that you put in front of me. And so that was, that's kind of one of the driving goals that we have is what are the tasks that we can take off the plate of a youth pastor that free them up to do what they're called to do, which is connect with and disciple students. And so I think it all kind of boils down to, hey, let's be faithful with what's in front of us. And I think at the end of the day, a lot of youth pastors are going, man, that's what I really want to do. If I strip everything else away, I really just want to be faithful with the students who are in front of me.
Well, that kind of leads us into what we're talking about. You said, how do we help youth pastors do the best they can, or how can I do the best they can? And so we're talking about excellence in youth ministry. Now, when I think of excellence to begin with, I mean, that could be, is everything perfect? That could be, all the ducks in the row, the screen's right. But I have a feeling that's not what you're talking about. So what is excellence in youth ministry?
Totally. I'm going to boil this down to the most basic way that we can ever put it. Because you're right. I think people hear the word excellence and they equate it immediately with perfection. And I think that that's a flaw in the way that we think about this. Excellence at its very core is doing the absolute best you can with what is in your hand. And so I think a lot of us, we just have to go, okay, what's in my hand right now that I'm stewarding? And how can I take that to the nth degree of what I can create with this? We see in the Gospels, the good and faithful servant was the one who multiplied what Jesus is giving the parable of the talents. And he, gives 5 to one, 2 to another, and 1 to another. And we see that the standard of excellence is simply taking what's already in our hand and making more out of it.
So, I mean, but I do think that a lot of people get that concept in their mind when we say excellence. And so that is a great definition to kind of boil that down and to bring that down. So as you are seeing churches strive for excellence, what are some of the things that you see and you just kind of not cringe, but you're like, hey, that's not exactly what we were talking about? And you can share examples without sharing names and churches, but what are some of the mistakes people make when they start to strive for excellence?
So I actually think that there are 2 ditches that we can fall into when it comes for striving toward excellence. The first ditch is putting unrealistic expectations on people, right? That goes back to the perfectionism piece where we just go, okay, maybe your expectations are not realistic considering what is actually in our hands. And that's when we see so many people suffering from burnout and from all of these other things, just because the expectations that were set on them in the first place were not actually possible to be reached. We put arbitrary measures on people and said, you have to reach this point, and reaching this point is what is going to define your worth here in this role. And so I think that is one extreme or one ditch that we can fall into. The other ditch that is easy on the exact opposite side is from the outset saying, I can't, I won't, I don't have the capacity, I'm already doing enough. And that's when I think these two, we have to find the medium balance between these 2 trains of thought. I will give an example from my own experience. So I am someone who I work super hard, but at some point I go, okay, this is done. We just have to ship it. We have to get this out the door. It's time to move on. My husband, on the other hand, is someone who says, no, it can always be better. We can always drive forward. We can always push a little further. We can always whatever. And so the 2 of us come up against each other a little bit in our process, especially because we work together day in and day out and all of the things that we do. I remember a few years before my husband and I were married, when I was still working at Messenger, we had a book release coming up, and I was working hard. I mean, when you're in social media and you're releasing a book, it's just, you are round the clock working there for a little while. We had a book release coming up and I was doing all these things. I'm working till, 10 p.m. every night. I'm trying to make it as the best that it can possibly be. And I remember someone said to me, Ellis, I'm so sorry that you have to do this. And at that moment, when I wasn't the owner, but I was an employee, I had this mentality of the future that said, one day I might be the leader. And I hope that whoever is working under me is going to take this to the degree that I'm taking it. And even though I wasn't the leader, I had an ownership mentality. And I think a lot of things with excellence come down to this ownership mentality. When it's yours, when you feel a sense of ownership over something, you are going to do things the absolute best that you can never do it. So fast forward a few years, now I'm working with my husband, and I came in to work with him, and we were partners, and he made it clear from the outset, hey, what's mine is yours. Like, I may have started this without you, but now you are part owner. But that owner mentality that I had when I wasn't the leader didn't translate to when I actually became the leader. And I came in and I kind of had this mentality when we first started working together of, this is yours, you built this, I'm just kind of along for the ride. I'll do what you ask me to do. But, and then he would bring things back to me, things that I had worked on. And he's like, hey, I know that you're capable of more than this. and it kind of came down to, we ended up having a huge conversation, and it kind of came down to the fact that I wasn't operating in excellence because I didn't have an ownership mentality. And an ownership mentality comes into play whether you are the owner or whether you're not. It's just about the way that you view what's in your hands and how you're stewarding it. And so when it comes down to it, I think excellence is directly correlated to how much ownership you take over the things that are in your hand day in and day out.
Well, when you mentioned ditch one and those expectations, one of the things I thought is there's multiple places those expectations come from.
Yeah.
That can be from a boss, that can be, especially in youth ministry. That is parents, that is leaders. And so, like, how do you kind of, if you're trying to get out of that ditch and get in the middle, how do you kind of navigate the fact that you have multiple places expectations are coming from?
Yeah. So I think, first and foremost, you just have to look and say, okay, who's putting these expectations on me? Is it coming from an outside source? Is it coming from my lead pastor? Is it coming from my family? Is it coming? And do these expectations have merit? And I think where you determine, okay, you know what? This person had this expectation on me and it was valid. And I've been over here in this ditch on the other side, making excuses of, I don't have time and I don't have the resources and I don't have the capacity. But what they're expecting of me is actually merited. That's when you kind of have to pull yourself out of the ditch and say, hey, I've got to get this together and really start working with what I've got to rise to the occasion here. And then I think there's the other circumstance in which you evaluate the expectations and you go, wow, this expectation is somewhat arbitrary. It's unmerited. To be, in all honesty, short of an act of God, it's absolutely impossible. And let me also say that sometimes there are impossible expectations that get put on you, and short of an act of God, it's not going to happen. But then it does, because God is involved. And so you have to, because I would say when the expectation is not merited, or it is impossible, or it's unrealistic, there are times when those expectations need to be reevaluated and renegotiated with whoever has put them on the table. There are other times when you will have a conversation to renegotiate whatever expectation is in front of you. And the answer, because you are under authority and submitted, is no, this is the vision. This is what we're going for. And do it. And, for lack of a better word, those are the moments where you say, God, okay, this is what I have. I'm going to take everything that's in my hand and I'm going to put it on the table. I will do my absolute best, but I need you to show up to do this or to not do this. But now I'm putting it in your hands.
Well, I think that's a good word, because like I said, we have people who are full-time youth ministry in this and watching this and listening. We have those, and I love this phrase. I heard it at a conference one time. I think it was Doug Field said, some of you raised your hand to use the bathroom and you realize that you volunteered to be the youth director. There are some who just stumbled in this because there wasn't a youth director and their kids were in the program and they wanted something for their kids. And they're like, I don't know what I'm doing, but I'll do it. And so that definition to look at excellence, because it's real easy. We're at a smaller church now. It's real easy to look and see, well, they have an awesome youth center, or they have, smoke and mirrors and lights and stuff. And the reality is none of that's bad. None of that is, but it's where you put that, because you could have someone who has all that, who's not putting excellence forth and not doing with what they could with that. And you have, the difference. Just curious, you don't have to share if you don't do this. Do you do any Enneagram stuff?
I do. Yes. So I'm an Enneagram
8?
3.
3. Okay.
I'm a 3. And I do not wing. I'm just a straight 3.
What's your husband's, if you don't mind sharing?
Also a 3. He is also a 3. However, we have had multiple conversations as of lately where I have, I know this is like the cardinal sin on the Enneagram. You're never supposed to type someone else. But I've said, you are behaving like an Enneagram 1. As if you believe there is only one way.
Well, I saw that, but also the phrase that you mentioned was, he was always, it can always be better, can always do more. So I'm a 5. And we're always trying, I have a youth ministry book saved in a Google Doc that I wrote 3 years ago that is not done yet. I probably should have already put it out. It's, multiplying volunteers in youth ministry and equipping people. But it's not done yet. And I'm going to keep refining it until it's done. And by the time it's done, then, Jesus will have come back. And we won't need that anymore. So
no, we need it now.
So that's some of those things so that just struck me. But that is part of, because I think what you said was to sit down and evaluate. And whether it's Enneagram, whether it's just a good counselor, whether it's just a good friend or a cohort of ministry, or a combination of all those, to sit down and say, okay, what are the expectations put on me?
Totally. And I can even totally. I can even give an example of how this has come to play in our life and ministry as of recently. I mentioned earlier that we host a youth pastor conference every single year, and we had it last week, and it was incredible. And every year it's awesome. We are a small team, so there are 5 of us who work full time at Youth Pastor Co. And then during conference season, we contract in 3 other people. So there are 8 of us as a full time team. And so anybody who's in the church world knows that to pull off a conference, it takes people, especially if you're going to do anything that has to do with an in-person audience. Like, people need to know where to go. They need to know how to register. They need someone to greet them at the door and walk them to there always needs to be people. And so for that reason, because we're a small team, we have always done our youth pastor conference exclusively online, because, 8 people can create an experience that thousands of people enjoy online. But the second you start putting people in a room, you start needing more of a team. And so this year we were gearing up for our youth pastor conference, and my husband has kind of had this vision in front of us that eventually the youth pastor conference is going to be an in-person thing that happens. I think we'll always have an online component of it, but our goal is to eventually have an in-person conference for youth pastors, where youth pastors can gather and learn together and build community and not feel like they're so alone in the bubbles of their own youth ministry and churches and communities. And so, he's had this vision in front of us for a while, and we had the incredible opportunity to partner with a church called Church of the Highlands this year to host our conference. And when they brought us in, they said, hey, if you want to have an in-person component to your conference this year, our room will seat 1,500 people. So, bring in however many you want. And my husband said, okay, and our goal was not 1,500. I think our goal was like 150. Is like, hey, let's bring in these people for the studio audience. And I remember it was the day that we were meeting with Church of the Highlands to just set the course and say, hey, these are our goals. We're going to go out from here. We're going to do this thing. And I told my husband, I was like, we can't do it. Don't go into this meeting and agree to something in person. There's 8 of us. How are 8 of us going to pull off anything that has to do with an in-person event? We're good at online. We've mastered online. Let's stay in our lane. And he said, absolutely not. He was like, I will not be held to, just the way that we've done it in the past, because that's the way that we've done it. He said, if we have the opportunity to push the ball further, even if it's with 100 people, even if it's gathering, 100, 150 people, that's what we're going to do. And looking back on it, knowing that, we just had conference a week ago now, and seeing 150 people gathered in that room, and the energy that was brought and the connections that were made between different youth pastors and I am so thankful that my husband pulled me out of my ditch and said, hey, we're not trying to fill the room with 1,500 people, but we will fill it with 100. And so, I think we both had to, he had to know, I can't set the bar too high that it will never be achieved, but you've got to get out of your ditch of small thinking.
Good. Well, you've talked about some of those mistakes. Help a youth director who's just starting out, or maybe who's been doing it for a little while, and as far as what are some of the best practices? What are some good examples? Do you have a list, or a top 10 list, or just some thoughts, and just speak to them for a minute and say, hey, here's how you can do excellence, and here's, don't be discouraged, and here's the ways to do this, and I'll just let you talk on that.
Totally. I think at the end of the day, and we said this at the beginning, excellence is doing the best you have with what's in your hand. So if you've got 100 students, if you've got 8 students, do what is absolutely best for your group. And here's the thing, your youth group is not the youth group of the church 2 blocks down. Your group might need something completely different than the guy who's youth pastoring that you see on social media. And so I think it really comes with, hey, I'm going to get alone with God, and I'm going to say, God, what is it that the students that you have trusted me with need? What are the goals? What do you want for their life? What's the calling that you've placed on them? And how can I better steward what you have given me with more? And that's quite the churchy answer. But at the end of the day, God has a goal and a vision for every single student that's in your student ministry. And they're in your student ministry for a reason, and you are their leader for a reason. And so I think we can't just say, I'm gonna try this, and I'm gonna go after this goal because that sounds good to me. I think we have to say, okay, here's the standard, but also, what's the vision that God has given me for the people who are within my ministry, and how do I better steward them as I move forward?
Okay. You did give me the big answer, and I know you can't go specific because you don't know anybody's groups, but if I'm talking with my volunteers and things like that, are there some questions I can ask? Are there some processes I can use to kind of help us as we're listening to God? Are there some, either a meeting or just some general things that we can have discussion starters with our students and our youth leaders that would help us kind of narrow down kind of where our focus is, where God has called us?
Totally. So, okay. So, you know what? I'll take this super practical. One of the things that we do, and we did this in our youth group before. I've done this in youth groups that I've just served in and not led. I've seen this work on every level. After every single meeting, or youth group night, or Sunday or Wednesday or whenever you meet, if you have a 10-minute meeting with your leaders or volunteers, and you put in front of them what are the wins, what are the losses, and what are the tweaks, you will be able to clearly identify what are the areas where we just need to grow here. And that'll show you the areas, because here's the thing, anything that's in the tweaks or the losses column is a place where whatever you're doing is not yet excellent. And it's not a bad thing. It just means that there's room for growth. And so I think on a really, really practical level, listing out the wins, the losses, the tweaks, and inviting your leaders into that conversation. Because here's the deal. If you're the only one with the vision of excellence, if your leaders haven't caught that vision, then it's going to be nearly impossible to achieve excellence within your ministry. You have to get your leaders on board with the vision of excellence. And so having the wins, here's the thing, you're the youth pastor, you're going to come off the stage and you're going to know what the wins, the losses, and the tweaks are. Sometimes you're making that list so that your leaders can see what's in your head, and creating a culture where everyone can take ownership for the vision and move it forward.
Practical is good. I like practical as well as philosophical. So
Yeah.
how do you kind of create that culture? What are some things that you can do to help? Because like you're right, if it's just your idea, it's not going to go anywhere. You've got to have other champions of this. So what are some other ways that you kind of help either convey the importance of that? Because I'm sure there's somebody who's like, well, we don't need that. We don't need to do that. Or some naysayers, and some people who are, I ran into some who are like, we'll go with you, but you're gonna have to drag us along. And so what are some, do you have any practical thoughts or ways that you kind of help to generate that culture, to propagate and make that be more adopted by more people than just yourself?
Totally. So, I think at the end of the day, culture is being created constantly. And so if you're not doing it actively, it's happening passively. And so I think if we want to create a culture of excellence, then we just have to keep beating the drum. And as soon as you've beat the drum 1,000 times and you think people are sick of this, that's probably the first time that they've actually heard it. And so as the leader, it is your job to create and set the culture for people to exist in. And if you're not doing it, someone else is, which doesn't say very good things about your leadership. And so here's what I would do on a practical level. I have a friend who was a youth pastor. When I lived in Colorado, I served in his youth ministry, and I can definitively say he has one of the best cultures within his leadership team that I have ever seen. And this is what he did. Every single time that someone was coming onto his team, he had a team covenant for his youth ministry. And he said, hey, I totally understand. He said, here's our team covenant. And if you read this and you go, you know what? This is not for me. This is not the culture that I live. This is not the commitment that I want to make. He said, I completely understand. I bless you as you go and find another place to serve in our church. And he said, but for this team, this is going to be the culture. And you have to sign this and commit to it to be on the team in the first place. And he would have rathered 2 great leaders who were committed to the culture that he was bringing than 20 who were halfway committed. And his team accomplished more and experienced explosive growth in their youth ministry because he was intentional about culture from the outset. Now, someone who's listening to this may go, okay, well, that's great for that guy who started that, way back when. But now I do have the 20 leaders who are halfway bought in and, aren't on board with the culture that I'm now being convicted to try and create and move forward. When my husband was a youth pastor, he was in this exact situation. His youth group exploded overnight, and he all of a sudden had leaders, so many leaders. I want to say he had 25 leaders. And he got a conviction from the Lord about the culture that he was building within the youth ministry and the leadership team. And after one night of youth group, he had a leadership meeting with his entire leadership group. And he said, from here on out, these are the standards that are going to be required for you to serve on this team. And he listed them out one by one. And let me tell you, it was not easy stuff. We're talking about every single leader had to be at a 6 a.m. Bible study 1 day a week throughout the city with our students, in addition to every Wednesday night. I mean, he was putting some things that are tough to ask someone to commit to on an every week basis. And at the end of the meeting, he said, look, I totally understand if this isn't for you. And there are no hard feelings if you look at this list and you go, hey, I'm just not in the season of life right now where I can commit to that. He said, you can walk out with no hard feelings, and you can come back at any time that you are willing to meet the criteria of what it is that we're trying to accomplish. He said, but I would rather have 5, who are bought in with this direction that we're now going than 25 who aren't. And he had 15 leaders, if I'm not mistaken. I'll have to fact check this later. I want to say he had 15 leaders that night decide, you know what, this was fun. but I'm not in it this deep. Like, this was not what I was looking to get involved with. And after he had that leadership meeting, the youth group just like exploded. And so it's amazing what can happen as a leader when you set the culture and you say, hey, I may not have had this conviction before, but now we're going to do the absolute best we can with what we have in our hands. And if that's not you in this season, that's totally fine. But for us, that's what we're going to do here.
Yeah, and I'm gathering from that and from most of what you said, intentionality, being intentional, having a reason for what you're doing, and along with that excellence. So you've talked a little bit, you talked about your organization and you talked about a conference. Tell us a little bit more, because I'm sure it'll come around next year and many of us will want to come in person. Like, tell us in general about the conference. Were there any of the speakers that I know you love them all, but anybody who just, just blew you away or spoke to you, or anything you learned as a participant? I know you're behind the scenes running around like crazy, but tell us about that conference.
Totally. So in years past, the conference is structured. It has been 20 speakers for 20 minutes over 2 days, completely online. We changed the structure a little bit. This year we had more speakers, but less sessions. So we did some panels and things like that. We had Pastor Craig Rochelle and Charlotte Gamble. And I have to be honest with you though, we had a guy named Manny Arango who has now spoken at all 4 of our youth pastor conferences. And he brought an incredibly convicting word about reading the Bible. And he basically just challenged everyone there. And he said, we've got, people who are getting on stage to preach messages as a vocational pastor who have never read the Bible all the way through. And he's like, that should never happen. And he came to the table. He has this entire crate of file folders, and every file folder is a different book of the Bible with all of his notes and commentary from every book of the Bible that he studied. And it was just an incredibly convicting call to say, hey, we have got to rein this in and get back to what matters. And that's the word of God. And so, yeah, it was an incredible 2 days at conference. We do it every single year. It is usually the last Monday and Tuesday of March. This year, it was the second to last Monday and Tuesday of March, but it will typically be in March, toward the end of March on a Monday and Tuesday. And we're looking forward to doing it again next year.
And you said it's totally free?
Totally free. So here's what we do is you can stream it online for both of those days completely free. And we make the replay passes available for purchase. So if you go, man, I really, wanted to hear Craig Rochelle or Manny Arango, but I missed their session, then the replay pass is available for purchase. But the conference itself is totally free.
I was wondering how we get access to that if we want to go back and look at it. So I just want those replay passes.
So the replay passes for this year are on youthpastorconference.com.
Okay. How much are those?
Oh, I'd have to look back. I know that the replay pass.
We'll put a link.
Yeah. Okay, perfect.
Yeah. And then we will include links to all those. And I'll ask you if you send us any other links that you would like included in show notes and things like that. So that way we can put all those in. So anything else you want to share? Anything else you want to encourage youth pastors to in this time? Can be related to excellence, can be something else that just popped into your head or something on your heart.
Yeah, I would just say, hey, you are in the position that you are because God put you there. You may think, hey, I raised my hand to go to the bathroom and I got signed up to be the youth director. And maybe that is how you ended up, in the role practically, but in a spiritual sense, you're there because God has you there. And, it's easy to think of students as the next generation, but students are the generation that has the most influence right now. And I even think back to, over a decade ago when I was in high school, and I go, if I had the conviction just about life with God, then that I hadn't, and I loved God when I was in high school, but I just think if I knew then what I knew now, how many people was I around on a daily basis who could have heard the gospel in a way that transformed their life before their life even like really takes off? It's a captive audience when you've got students in middle school and high school. And so just know that the students that you have you're in your youth group for a reason. The students that are in your youth group are there for a reason, and just be faithful with what's in front of you, because God is the one who rewards us ultimately, and he sees and he knows it all. And he knows that you're doing the best with what you've got in your hand. And so, yeah, I would just encourage you, hey, you're there for a reason.
Yeah. Awesome. Well, thank you for being with us. If somebody wants to reach out, get in touch, or how do we find you? How do we get connected with your companies and all that?
Yeah, totally. So I'm on Instagram. It's just Elles Maddry, EllesMaddry. I'm on Instagram, and TikTok is the same handle. And so, yeah, you can find me there.
Awesome. And then Youth Pastor Co. we can get to, if we go there, we can also get to the cards.
So Youth Pastor Co., if you're looking for youth ministry resources, is just youthpastor.co. If you type that into a browser. Cards Christians Like is totally separate. That's cardschristianslike.com. And you can also find the cards on Amazon as well.
Awesome. Well, thank you again so much for joining us, and thank you everybody for listening. We hope that you'll enjoy this conversation, and Elles had so much to share. Make sure to go back and listen to it again, and also catch our other episodes again with all of those things at Talk Student Men and at studentministryconversations.org. We'd love for you to connect with us there. So thank you all very much, and have a great day.